Welcome, everyone. I'm thrilled as my first guest of 2026 to have Feroz, a dear friend and a man I really admire. So I'm going to turn it over to Feroz and he'll introduce himself.
Firstly,
Welcome.
thank you, Bobby, for inviting me to your podcast. It's a pleasure to start 2026 speaking to you. Um, Introduction, let me share what I call as a love introduction. And I copy this from my friend who's a professor of wisdom at Stanford. He says, we all introduce ourselves typically with, where we work, but who are we if we kind of remove the titles from us. And so my love introduction is I love potatoes, books, and my immediate family, which is Vivan, my son, who's 17 years old, Dipali, my wife, for more than 25 years, and my dog, Coco, who is a companion dog for my son, who's on the autism spectrum. So that's my love introduction. Maybe on the more professional side, I've been working with SAP for more than 26 years now. I am a senior vice president running something called the SAP Academy for Engineering based in the Bay Area. I see myself as a storyteller because of the various hats that I wear. The common thread is I'm trying to tell a story. I'm an author and a columnist. I also occasionally do guest lectures at Columbia University. Um, I've dwelled into movie making of late. But if you look at it, the common thread is I'm using all of these as platforms to tell a story.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love that love introduction, Feroz. And yes, you're absolutely a storyteller. Wonderful, Feroz. So let's get right into it, my friend. How do you define respect in the workplace? And I really invite you to take a global perspective on this because you are
Mm,
working, your teams are all over the world. I believe, your whole career has been very global. So yeah.
yeah. Um, I've thought deeply about this topic, and my analysis is that respect is attention. Respect is listening without interruption. It is to listen to ideas from a place of curiosity. And I've been, and because you mentioned about global, to give a global perspective, I feel this idea that respect is attention is actually extremely global. And just to give you an example, specifically, I was just very fortunate to meet His Holiness the Dalai Lama just a month ago. Um, and the thing that amazes me about His Holiness is that he would meet thousands of people every day, but and he would sometimes meet people for a few seconds, but that moment, the attention that he gives to that person makes you feel that person will feel that at that moment he's 100% yours. And that comes from a place of respecting every individual equally. Doesn't matter the position, the hierarchy, your background, none of that matters. And that actually got me thinking. And when I look at some of really the most outstanding leaders in the world, they lead with respect, which also means they lead with providing and giving attention to that individual, to that conversation coming from a place of curiosity. There is a lot of dignity without hierarchy, right? We always talk about power structures, but imagine if a person treats you without that power dynamics, which means he's treating you from a place of dignity with there is no hierarchy at all. um, and people with respect are also able to deliver truth with care. Sometimes we think that respect means you can't have differences in opinion, but it's one. There's a very beautiful book about um, conversations between Rabindranath Tagore and Mahatma Gandhi. It's really one of my favorite books. It is, I think, called The Poet and the Mahatma, and there's just letters. And when you read those letters, it's just a case study of what respect between two individuals could look like, even though they had severe disagreements. they had, you could see those conversations where Tagore will actually tell to Gandhiji that, no, I disagree with you. But the amount of respect that each of them had for each other is just unbelievable. And that for me is really what respect is all about. I'm trying to give examples of what respect would look like. And I think we live in times where we seem to have lost some of that. We are loud, we don't listen, we come to conclusions, we judge. I think all of those can be packaged as respect. That's how I see respect as. And I think you can apply the same to the workplace too. If you're able to walk into a meeting and be yourself and not be worried about you being judged, and that your mistakes will be held against you, but mistakes will come from a place of inquiry rather than being judged. I think that's what a good workplace looks like, and that's what for me respect looks like.
Beautiful, beautiful, Firoz. Thank you. Very applicable. I mean, all of it. Those stories are so important. I'm going to have to go look that book up.
Yeah.
And the key thing I want to go a little deeper on with the definition is this point that you've laid out around, it's kind of a cliche, but something like respect is not a soft skill. It's actually a
Mm.
hard skill. And it takes deliberate practice, and it takes that catching myself when I'm about to go to that judgment and that quick, type A personality of wanting things quickly rather than taking the time. By the way, the letter S in respect and the quotient is spaciousness.
Yeah.
Can we create that space so that
Yeah.
we don't rush through things? And not everything needs to be pondered carefully, but just that listening aspect you brought in is beautiful.
Yeah. One of the things that I've been thinking, and like you said, this is practice. This is muscle memory. Can you practice this enough so that you are very aware? One thing that I try to do myself is to observe myself and kind of try to have an out of body experience when you're having a difficult conversation, right? To observe how you behave in a difficult conversation. Are you rushing into, are you trying to be defensive? Are you trying to, beat the other person rather than listening with curiosity? And I think if you have a method to do that, is to observe how your mind is functioning, how your body is functioning. I think that's something that you need to practice often to to be able to have a respectful conversation in any forum. And there are times when I am kind of embarrassed with my own behavior, where I think I've rushed into conclusions and maybe raised my voice, and then when I try to look back, and I wish I had behaved differently. So none of us is perfect, but it is something that you can get better with practice. Which also, as I said, is an indication that you respect the other person. And it's interesting that the times when you do things that you're not very proud of is actually because you probably don't respect the person on the other side enough. It's there is a causal element to it, that if you respect by default the other person, you give them enough space to listen and with attention. But if you come in with certain judgments, you actually do not give that amount of spaciousness to the other person. So I love your framework where in that respect, spaciousness is a very integral part of it.
Yeah, thank you. And what's also coming up as you speak about the zooming out and being self-reflective and observing how I showed up and, the classic intent and impact and leadership, right? I'm just reminded, I was just listening to something today. I'm a big believer in the science of journaling, right? So that's another form of like, can I debrief a meeting? Can I, with myself, not with my team or others, but just with myself? Can I be honest, be brutally honest with
Mm,
myself to say, what was
mm,
really going on when I got angry? What
mm,
judgments was I coming, at that from?
mm.
And does that work or not? It's not about right or wrong, but just
Yeah,
simply having the patience to just observe yourself,
yeah,
myself,
yeah.
and then decide what comes after that.
Yeah. And I think it comes from a place of deep security. Feeling secure about yourself is the first step towards even getting to a point of reflection, because reflections are hard. I mean, reflections kind of, how should I use the word? It disentangles yourself, and you are seeing yourself bare and naked. So it's hard.
It's very
Reflections are
likely.
very, very hard. So if you're not secure about who you are reflections are going to be that much more difficult. I've seen people who want to do the reflection, but they kind of push it away. They kind of because it's hard
Yeah.
to be self-critical, to see yourself not, as I said, in the most proudest form, where you've acted in ways that is not doesn't reflect good on you, is very hard. But that's how you get better too.
Yeah, no, no, very true, very true. And I see that all the time. And it's not something you can push somebody towards. You can, invite them into it. But yeah. All right. So let's get to the next one, Firoz. If you have tangible examples of when you felt that a company culture, team, environment has respect with these elements baked in, what does that look like when you feel that healthy nature of respect in a workplace?
Very interesting question because I feel that a respectful workplace has a very unique energy. You can feel it. It's very hard to point to these, five things that a place should have. I'm sure you can kind of analyze that. But I think the first feeling is you walk in and you feel that energy, right? And that energy is not just reflected by the leader, but literally every team member can feel that. And maybe if you kind of look into the details of that, and there are many elements to that, but as I said, it starts from feeling it, a certain sense of energy. But if you peel different layers, I would say, um, in an organization which is respectful, credit would travel very accurately. Okay, that's I see that very often, that people are not scramping to get credit, but it travels very seamlessly, very effortlessly. People very generous to give credit where it's due. By the way, it's also very accurate. It doesn't. I've also seen situations where it's fake. You're just trying to be nice, and you have to be very aware that that's not how respectful organizations are. Respectful organizations are generous with credit where it's due, but it's also very accurate, right? Because if you fake it once, people find that out. So the one thing is really credit travels accurately. The second thing is um, really mistakes are met with inquiry. It's not coming from a place of who did it, but what went wrong, right? So it's just like how credit can be given. The opposite is what happens when mistakes happen, and then you see that when mistakes happen, they are met with inquiry. It's also a good, respectful workplace is also a place where I would say silence is safe. Not everybody has to speak. You can see there are I sometimes walk into a meeting and I'm seeing like people are desperately trying to say something without actually having much to say. and 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 that's because silence is not safe in many places. They are seen as weaknesses, but in a very healthy team, silence is safe. It's people are okay. And sometimes I say this often in that in my team, some of the top performers hardly speak. They let the work do their talking, and they don't feel the need to just speak for the sake of speaking, right? So these are just nuances that you can see in these teams, which are not just high performing, but also are respectful of each other. What it basically means is that how does power become less relevant, or how does power diminish its voice? One of the practices that I do in team meetings is that I'm always the last one to speak. I try to give everybody a chance to kind of put their point of view. So that's what I meant when I say power kind of lowers its voice. You could walk into a meeting and you could see that the leader is speaking 90% of the time. You'll realize there's something off. So these are the nuances that you see in a team where people are respected and there is a mutual respect across teams, individuals.
So, Firoz, thank you for this piece about science. You're the first person who's brought it in. I think it's a very critical element. And, I hope the listeners really take that in as, especially in our extrovert prone world, uh, it's so uncomfortable for many, right? To be
Yeah.
give that space and permission when the priority mostly is about results and quick outcomes and all of that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I think it's the times we live in, unfortunately, is also loud and cluttered, and so kind of silence and introspection kind of takes a back seat, unfortunately, unless you are very intentional about bringing it to the forefront. And I think the only way to do it is through your actions, more than talking too much about it. Is just how you lead yourself, how you provide space to others makes a huge difference.
Well, yeah, that's from, I think, the leader side as intention and being deliberate about it. But I'm
Mm.
thinking about, I would imagine that the impact, especially with Gen Z,
Yeah.
right, that are, again, yes, these are stereotypes, but, there's research about it. It's really that desire to be seen and heard and have agency is
Mm.
so critical. So this skill, I think, as a competency is so critical for a
Yeah.
leader.
Hmm.
Great. And so let's switch gears. How can you feel? I mean, I love the way you emoted that, just feeling it, right? When it's present. And what's in the opposite when it's not present? What's
Mm.
that environment like? What are some telltale signs?
Mm. I had I had an experience where I felt not respected at workplace, and so when I look back at what happened during that time, really on a meeting to meeting basis, you walk into a meeting with a sense of fear. Um, you are rehearsing almost every conversation. That's when you realize that there is no respect. Respect is when it is effortless, it's seamless. You can walk in, be yourself. I'm not saying you have to walk in without preparation. Preparation is very different, but preparation is different from literally having to rehearse and think about every possible situation, because you're always coming from a place of fear. There is no sense of psychological safety. And so a place where a relationship which is where there is lack of respect is a one where you are over prepared, you are rehearsing every conversation, because there is no sense of psychological safety. And that for me is a clear indicator that there is no respect between two individuals. As I said, it's if you've gone through it, you know when you feel that, and I've felt that. Not too. I've been very fortunate that I haven't felt that too many times in my career, but the few times that I did, it really leaves a lot of scars in you. It's pretty toxic, and it can be very deeply impacting you, and how you deal with others.
Yeah, firstly, from a love place, I'm really glad to hear that you haven't had too many of those experiences.
Yeah,
But the
yeah.
data is, MIT Sloan has numbered it at $50 billion just in the US every year in lost productivity because of toxic culture.
Oh, yeah.
And then the other thing that you brought in that's been present in this whole conversation is Amy Edmondson's work on psychological safety, where she, in particular, her work began with looking at hospitals.
Mm,
And what she found is that hospitals where there are more mistakes reported
yeah,
are more successful with their key metrics, right?
yeah.
Saving lives,
Mm,
versus all the positioning, all the prep, all the what should I say and shouldn't I do, what policy am I, adhering to or not, creates more fear and lower productivity and
yeah,
outcomes that a
yeah,
business requires. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Thank you for that.
yeah.
All right, Feroz. So your top tips, my friend, for how we can cultivate more of that. Beautiful nuanced way that you defined what makes for a respectful place. But what can you leave with listeners on how to take it forward?
Yeah, I think, I mean, these are principles that I've tried to live by, and these are not just slogans. One of the things that I often say is that trust produces speed. And what I mean by that is that, I say start by giving trust before expecting it in return. And so if you start every relationship seeing and hoping for the best intention in the other person and start with trust, I think it can produce incredible results very quickly. Of course, you should also be aware that a few times you could be taken for a ride. But it's okay. In the longer scheme of things, I felt that it's much better to start with trust than to wait for a very long time to get that trust and then start working from there. And all the data shows that if you start with trust, it also produces a lot of speed. But the thing that I often tell people is that trust but verify. It's very important to verify the trust that you have given. Sometimes if you just give trust and say, I just hope everything is fine, can lead you into trouble. So while trust produces speed, you should also trust and verify once in a while, not often enough, but once in a while. So that's the first thing that I want to tell people. The second principle, and this probably seems very spiritual in its outlook, but actually there is enough science to tell you that intention has infinite organizing capacity. If you have the right intentions, you know things can organize around it. It seems, whether it's the Alchemist book has a version of it, but and people sometimes, especially in the business world, think it's soft stuff and foo-foo stuff and so on. But I've actually, in my life, I've seen that the power of intentions is incredible. Of course, you have to back it up with work and so on, but intentions do have infinite organizing capacity. And even if this conversation, for example, I'm sure it started with an intention from you to have this conversation, and even though I had to move around many things to make it happen, but the fact that it has happened meant that your intention and my intention had the ability to make things work eventually by moving around stuff. So it comes from a place of intention. So the second thing that I really lived my whole life very deeply is that intention has infinite organizing capacity, and the purity of the intention matters, right? Is it coming from a place of generosity, or is it coming from a place of what's in for me? That can dilute the intention. So if your intentions are pure, uh, you know you can move mountains, and I've seen that in so many examples in my life. And the last thing, last but not the least, is really, Bobby, I mean, this is something that every religious text has told us, and maybe the holy grail of meaning of life is just love. And maybe, I don't know, I'm just getting older or what it is, but you kind of see that so clearly over and over again. And a lot of people think that, does this work in a corporate world? It always does. It always does. It is, the answer to everything is eventually love. And so if you can lead with love, and kind of put the fear behind you. I'm not saying you don't have fear, but if you can lead every conversation, every dialogue, every activity with love, I think the outcomes are far better than if you lead it with fear, where sometimes fear can give you the outcomes in the short run, but in the long run, love eventually wins. So this is nothing new. I think generations have said this, but I think you have to live it to understand it deeply.
Yeah, very powerful. Firoz, thank you. So trust, intention, and love. And on love, I often say to people, I think we don't think twice, at least in the US, of throwing the F-bomb
Yes,
in our language, in our communication. But there's a lot of resistance to that love word, and
it is.
it's really shunned
Yeah.
in corporate circles. So the other thing I'll say in closing, it's unfortunate with the way media works these days that
Mm.
stories like yours and your style of leadership and the success that you've had with this style. And by the way, I'll give you credit. I mean, you're still very young, and I think you've led this way always. It's not
Yeah.
something that has come up as you've matured older.
Yeah.
That I think stories like yours, that we have plenty of leaders all over the world that are practicing these things,
Yes.
that are living these principles. In
Yes.
fact, I forget his name, but there's a private equity guy, VC person who studied alternative ways of doing business, and that there are plenty of non-publicly traded companies with leaders that have put people first and put these values first that are extremely successful, both with their people and financially. So I think that's all intertwined with this, and I just want to close with hope that it's leaders like you that make this world a better place. So thank you so much. It's been an honor to have you.
Thank you so much, Bobby. Thank you.
Thanks.